Let's begin, not with a loud noise, nor a flash of color, but with mist, a quiet rising mist, the kind that curls gently at your feet, that softens the air, that makes the world feel closer and further away all at once. You are in Japan, but not the Japan of bullet trains or bright neon. No, this is Edo-period Japan, the 17th, perhaps the 18th century, before electricity, before glass windows, before the world sped up. The streets are narrow, packed with wooden homes. The paper walls let in wind and rumor alike. Lanterns flicker against the early evening sky, and someone nearby is singing a lullaby, not to a child, but to the silence. You are drifting into a world of the in-between, a place of customs and ghosts, of rituals half remembered and names spoken only at night. In this soft-lit journey, we will wander through hidden alleys and quiet stories, stories of spirits, of samurai, of bathhouse servants and brothel girls, of magistrates who judge the living and listen to the dead. But we begin now in steam, in the quiet hum of water being heated, in the footsteps of those who served, and those who vanished behind the curtains. Before we begin, do subscribe if you like our content. Let us enter. Imagine yourself standing outside a bathhouse in Edo. The year is somewhere around 1730, or maybe 1754. Dates don't matter here. What matters is the air, heavy with heat, wood smoke, and cedar oil. You are standing near the Ronin, a simple curtain that hangs over the doorway. It flutters just slightly, enough to hint at the world within. Inside, the light is low. A golden haze from the lanterns mixes with thick clouds of steam rising from the baths. The scent is sharp, herbs soaking in hot water, mingling with the tang of metal from the wooden tubs bound in iron. It is quiet, but not silent. The sound of trickling water, a ladle dipping, a faint cough, a slipper brushing against old floorboards. It is, in its own way, a sacred hush. The bathhouse, Sento, is more than a place to get clean. It is a place where bodies are reset, where gossip flows more freely than water, where ritual meets routine, and where, sometimes, the barrier between the living and the dead feels just a little thinner. But before we speak of ghosts, we must speak of those who kept this place running. The servants. They are not often written about. No names remain. Only glimpses in passing lines from travelers or old fiction. But they were always there. Young men and women, sometimes as young as 10, sometimes in their 20s, who woke before the fires were lit and stayed until the last guest had gone. Their tasks were endless. Water had to be drawn, wood chopped, fires stoked, floors scrubbed, towels folded, buckets emptied, herbs steeped just long enough to be potent, but not bitter. One servant might spend the entire morning boiling yuzu fruit for a winter bath, its bright citrus smell meant to cheer the body and guard against colds. Another might prepare a tray of roasted barley tea for the old man who came each afternoon at exactly the same time, who always sat in the same corner, and who once whispered that he had seen something unexplainable in the fogged-up mirror by the back wall. These bathhouse servants learned to move quietly, to keep their eyes low, but they saw everything. They heard the whispered conversations between merchants and courtesans. They noticed who paid with coins and who paid with silence. They saw the bruise half hidden beneath a collar, or the way a customer never looked at their own reflection. They also knew the stories, because every bathhouse had at least one. One tale passed down, never written, only told when the steam was high and the lights low. Like the tale of the woman who came in during the last hour before closing, always just before the fires died down. She was wrapped in too many layers for the season, her sleeves damp, her eyes unreadable. She never undressed, never bathed, She simply stood near the edge of the steam room and left no footprints on the floor. A servant once tried to follow her out, but when he reached the curtain, there was no one there. He did not return to work the next day. In another Sento, it was said a shadow lingered in the men's side of the bath. A long shape, darker than the steam. Guests would feel a cold brush along their shoulders, as though someone had passed by. But there would be no one, and the mirror would briefly fog, not from heat, but from breath. These stories were not told with fear. They were told with respect, because in the world of the Sento, the boundaries were soft. The body was laid bare, the soul quieted. It was a place where memory could settle in the corners, and where sadness could take shape if no one spoke its name. Servants knew this, and they learned, over time, little habits, superstitions, perhaps, but followed without fail. A pinch of salt at the doorway, a sprig of mugwort hung by the fire, always sweeping in one direction, never toward the door. They believed these things kept the bathhouse calm, balanced, alive but not too alive. And as they moved through their long days and longer nights, they whispered their own thoughts into the steam, their own wishes, fears, secrets, knowing the mist would carry them somewhere, even if no one else ever heard. The bathhouse was a world unto itself, a place where strangers undressed beside each other, but where silence protected what the eyes saw. And in that steam, rising, swirling, disappearing, we find the first layer of our journey. A world half real, half memory, and the soft echo of a servant's footsteps still brushing the floor. The servants of Edo's bathhouses rarely spoke of themselves. They moved like water, fitting the shape of their surroundings, smoothing the surface without being noticed. But even water remembers. And beneath the practiced silence, their lives held stories of their own. Stories carried on in scraps of conversation, shared glances, or the way a hand lingered on a warm wooden rail just a moment longer than needed. Some came from the countryside, their families bound to land and tradition, sent to the city to earn coin, to lessen the burden back home, to vanish from a scandal whispered too loudly in the wrong ear. Others were born into the city, into the alleyways and side streets of Edo, where smoke from cooking fires mixed with the scent of dried fish and old paper, and where a job at the bathhouse, though tiring, was steady, regular, safe. There were rivalries between servants, sometimes unspoken, and sometimes less so. Who prepared the finest soaps? Who could split the firewood cleanest with a single stroke? Who earned the rare compliment from a favored guest? But there were also friendships, quiet, enduring ones. A girl who shared her rice balls at break time. A boy who showed you how to avoid the floorboard that always creaked. An old attendant who knew when to pretend not to hear your sobbing behind the towel rack. And in the hush of evening, when the final buckets were emptied and the fires burned low, they spoke in fragments, not of great events or politics. Those were for the highborn and the storytellers. No, they spoke of small things. A dream that felt too real. A crow that followed someone to work for 3 days. The strange figure seen walking along the canal who never looked up. Or a guest who returned every week for years, until one day he didn't, and no one said anything. But the towel he always used remained folded and used in the same place for months. These stories were passed quietly, like folded paper cranes left on windowsills. Some lasted only a season. Others endured for generations. There were tales that crossed from one bathhouse to another, like the mirror woman, whose reflection smiled before her lips did, or the child guest who vanished in the steam, never to be found, though his sandal, damp and warm, appeared days later on a shelf that had been swept twice. Some servants kept notebooks, tucked behind floorboards or hidden under folded robes. Not official logs, but little records of unusual events, of odd guests, of dreams that wouldn't fade, of words overheard through the walls that made no sense, but echoed oddly in the bath's acoustics. One such note, discovered in the wall of a crumbling bathhouse decades later, read only this. She came again, left the tub full, smelled of camphor and ash. No money left, but mirror fogged afterward. I cleaned it twice. Her handprint remained. It was unsigned. Another servant, years before that, was known to leave bundles of herbs, cloves, ginger, and burnt rice husk on the threshold every seventh night. He said it was for those who still wander. No one questioned him. To those within the bathhouse, the supernatural was not theatrical. It was subtle. It was background. A truth that did not demand belief, only respect. For every strange tale, there was another that simply ended. No explanation, no closure, just a faint unease, a forgotten sandal, a coin that never tarnished. And so the servants carried these stories, in their posture, in the way they hesitated at certain doors, in how they folded the towels with one extra crease, not because it was needed, but because someone once said it kept bad spirits from following you home. Outside the bathhouse, they were no one, easily passed on the street, easily replaced. But inside, in the softest hours between steam and silence, they were the keepers of memory, the bearers of small legends, the listeners, and in their own quiet way, the storytellers too. Now, let the water settle. The guests are gone. The lanterns are dim. The steam no longer rises from the great wooden tubs, but hangs low across the tile and cedar, like a breath being held. This is when the bathhouse is at its most silent, and at its most alive, because if the living retreat at night, the others, it is said, sometimes enter. In Japanese folklore, there are spirits known as yūrei, souls of the dead who, for one reason or another, could not rest. Their presence in the world of the living is rarely loud, rarely violent, but deeply unsettling. The bathhouse, with its soft corners and water-worn wood, its steam and silence, was the perfect place for such spirits to linger. Some yūrei were mournful, drawn to the memory of a life cut short, or a ritual left incomplete. A woman might return to the bath where she once waited for a husband who never came back from war. Her spirit, wrapped in wet silk, still pacing the edge of the tub, brushing the walls with a hand that leaves no trace. A child yūrei, curious and half-forgotten, might be heard giggling near the washing stools, until the sound stops too suddenly, and no footprints are found on the damp floor. Then there are the vengeful ones, the onryo, less common in bathhouse stories, but no less feared. One tale tells of a man who wronged a servant girl, then vanished from Edo. Years later, his eldest son fell ill. The family traced the sickness not to disease, but to a name whispered in a fever dream, the girl's name, a name no one had spoken in years. It was said her ghost waited, each seventh night, at the bathhouse where she once worked, standing beneath the eaves, silent, watching the water boil. To protect against such spirits, the bathhouse had quiet customs. A pinch of salt at the threshold, always swept into the fire when the sun set. A mirror turned toward the wall at night, lest it reflect something not meant to be seen. And silence, always silence if the temperature dropped suddenly, or if the sound of dripping water began in a room that was dry. Not fear exactly, but reverence. Even the layout of the bathhouse reflected old beliefs. Certain doors were never built to face west. Certain tubs were never used on the first full moon of spring. It was not about ghosts, some said. It was about balance, about not inviting what had not been properly sent away. Yūrei were not monsters. They were people, once, but people whose pain had hardened, whose grief had stretched across time, becoming something more. And because they were people, the servants of the bathhouse treated them with the same quiet respect they gave to the living. A servant might bow slightly when passing a darkened corner, might leave a towel folded near the mirror, even if no guest had used it, might whisper a name into the steam and then never speak of it again. And sometimes, they said, if a yūrei found peace, if someone remembered the right name or lit the right incense, then the bathhouse felt different, warmer, as if the water, long after boiling, still held a memory of welcome. The spirits did not speak, but their presence was felt, in the subtle shift of lantern light, in the smell of chrysanthemums with no source, in the single footprint left in a dry room, and always, always in the steam, because steam remembers. It holds shape for just a moment before releasing it again, like grief, like memory, like a name you forget until it whispers itself back to you, just as you fall asleep. By now, the water has cooled. The hour grows late. The servants have folded away the towels, swept the ash from beneath the furnace, and poured the last bucket of used bath water into the narrow gutters that lead toward the canal. But their work is not yet done, because cleansing in Edo-era bathhouses was not merely physical. It was ritual, and rituals must be completed. In Japan, purification is a concept that runs deep, older than even the Edo period. It is present in Shinto, the native spiritual tradition, where acts of cleansing, misogi, water purification, are as sacred as any prayer. Within the bathhouse, though not a shrine, echoes of these rituals remained. A simple gesture, like washing from left to right, or bowing slightly before stepping into the water, was more than etiquette. It was tradition, a quiet tether to something larger than the self. The servants knew the difference between a clean body and a purified one. Before closing for the night, a senior attendant might take a wooden dipper, fill it with cool water, and pour it slowly over a stone near the back of the bathhouse. This stone, smooth, unassuming, was called a kamiseki, or spirit stone, by some. Its presence was unofficial, often unnoticed by guests, but the servants always knew. They poured the water with care, sometimes whispering a short phrase, not a prayer, exactly, but a kind of offering. A thank you, a please go gently, a return in peace. It was believed that not only human guests visited the bathhouse, the spirits of the water, of the wood, of the air, they too came and went. Keeping harmony with them was important. No harsh words before sunrise, no cutting of nails near the tubs, no laughter too loud after dark. These may sound like superstition now, but in their quiet repetition, they formed a rhythm, a shape to life, a comfort in the ritual. Some bathhouses even held seasonal observances. On certain nights, herbs would be added to the water, not just for scent, but for protection. Yamogi, mugwort, was common in early spring, said to ward off illness. Shobu, iris, during the 5th month, believed to strengthen the spirit. Guests might not know the reasons, but the servants did, and the water, it was said, remembered. Even the act of sweeping had meaning. The brooms were sometimes made of bundled reeds or twigs tied with silk cord. At closing, the attendant would sweep not only the dirt and leaves, but the lingering energy of the day. They swept toward the drains, or out the rear gate, not toward the main entrance, lest good fortune be accidentally brushed away. In this, there was no fear, only care, It was understood that cleanliness in Edo was not only hygienic, it was moral. It reflected the inner order of a person, the clarity of their heart. And so, to clean the bathhouse each night was also to cleanse the self, to set down the day's burdens, to let the water take what the spirit could no longer carry. And when the lanterns were finally extinguished, one by one, the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was completion, a stillness earned, a space prepared for whatever might come next. Sometimes that was sleep, sometimes memory, and sometimes a whisper from the steam. Now let the steam fade, let the water still, let us step away from the tiled warmth of the bathhouses, and walk instead down the narrow streets of Edo, long after the lamps have been lit. The air here is sharper, more deliberate. The scent of pine ink, warm rice, and charcoal lingers. You can hear the soft tapping of geta on packed dirt. A courier passes. A shopkeeper bolts his shutters. And somewhere, a judge is still awake. His name is Ukatadasuk, a name not always spoken with reverence, but with a kind of awe, curiosity, and, in some corners, unease. He was not a ruler, not a samurai war hero. He did not wear ornate armor or command armies from horseback. He wore robes of quiet authority. He sat at a desk, and he listened. Uka served as a magistrate in Edo during the early 18th century, a time when the city was growing fast, swelling with trade, artisans, and ambition. Disputes came in like tides, over property lines, debt, slander, inheritance crime. But what made Uka different was not merely his position, it was his mind. He approached the law not as a sword, but as a lantern, not to strike, but to illuminate. He believed that truth, like a shadow, often slipped between the obvious facts, that justice was not always found in confession, but sometimes in silence. Many of his judgments are still remembered, not because of their severity, but because of their cleverness, their quiet poetry, their folkloric flair. Stories of Uka began to drift through the city even while he lived, told in sake shops, whispered over rice bowls, or shared between woodblock printers late at night as they wiped ink from their sleeves. Sometimes these tales were exaggerated, sometimes softened, and sometimes they blurred between record and legend. But in all of them, a pattern remains, a sense that behind the paper doors and court scrolls, there sat a man who did not fear the strange, who welcomed complexity, who saw the law not as cold doctrine, but as a story in motion. There is one tale in particular that has lingered, one where the shadows of guilt did not fall where expected, and a single lantern revealed more than the accused intended. But before we arrive at that story, let us first understand the shape of Uka's court. Imagine it, a small chamber with wooden beams darkened by time, a window that lets in a line of soft morning light, dust motes spinning slowly in its path. Scrolls are stacked beside the magistrate's desk. A single inkstone sits at the center. There is no fanfare, no gavel, no robe of ermine or gold, just a man and the slow unfolding of truth. It begins, as many of Uka's stories do, not with a scream or a sword, but with a whisper. A shopkeeper, age precise, arrives at the magistrate's hall just after sunrise. His robe is neatly folded at the sleeves. His eyes are wide with something between fear and disbelief. He bows deeply and presents his case. Something has been stolen, but not a coin, nor a lacquer box, nor anything that would tempt a thief in the usual sense. No, what has gone missing is a scent. He explains that he owns a small shop near the fish market, a humble place, mostly broths and miso, simmered slowly with kelp and dried anchovy. He does not sell much, but the smell alone brings people near. A good smell, he says, is half the sale. And yet, he has noticed a young man. Each morning, the same thing. The boy stands outside the shop. He never enters, never speaks. He simply waits, breathes deeply, and walks on. This has gone on for days, weeks, and now the shopkeeper insists he is owed something. If the boy comes each day to enjoy the smell of the soup, is he not stealing some part of it? Is a scent not value? Oka listens, quietly. He asks no immediate questions. He does not laugh, nor does he dismiss the case. Instead, he nods slowly and calls for the boy to be brought in. The boy arrives, thin and unsure, bowing low. Uka studies him for a long moment, then speaks gently. Have you taken anything from this man's shop? The boy shakes his head. No, my lord. Not a coin, not a cup. No, my lord. Only the smell. It was comforting. I meant no harm. Uka closes his eyes, as if listening to something not in the room. Then, without a word, he turns to the shopkeeper and asks him, do you feel that the smell of your soup has true worth? The man says yes. It draws customers. It is part of the product. It has value. Uka nods again, and then, softly, he orders the boy to reach into his satchel, to take out the few coins he has, 3 small pieces of copper. The boy obeys, hands trembling. Uka holds out his hand, and then he shakes the coins gently beside the shopkeeper's ear. Once, twice. The copper clinks softly, clearly. Then he stops. He places the coins back in the boy's hand. There, he says, you have received the sound of payment for the smell of soup. A pause, and then a ripple of laughter. Not mocking, but warm. Even the shopkeeper allows a smile to slip through his surprise. Uka does not smile. He simply turns the page in his record book and prepares for the next case. Because for him, justice was not only about crime and punishment. It was about balance, symbol, and a certain harmony. In the storybooks, this tale is often called the smell of soup and the sound of coins. It has been told and retold for generations. But what lingers most is not the cleverness, but the quiet, the way truth was measured not in weight, but in understanding. It begins quietly, of course, as most true mysteries do, not with a scream, not with blood on a tatami mat, but with a light where no light should be. The story comes to Uka in fragments, not from samurai or soldiers, but from servants, from street sweepers, from women who carry water at dusk. They speak of a lantern, one that glows faintly in a side alley off the bamboo district. Its paper is pale blue, its handle is rusted, and yet it is never unlit. Even in storm, even in bright sun, the lantern flickers softly. More than that, it moves, not far, but enough. Each night, it hangs from a different post, a different corner, a different nail hammered into old cedar. And always, someone nearby dreams strangely. A woman wakes in the middle of the night with her late husband's name on her lips. A butcher finds his tools laid out, just as his grandfather once arranged them. A child, mute since birth, sings in her sleep. The people are unsettled, not afraid, not exactly, but unsure. So they turn to the magistrate. Uka listens. As always, he does not scoff, nor shrug. He simply sends for the lantern. His men return after nightfall. and they bring it to the court, still softly glowing. The flame does not sputter. It does not consume the paper. It sits gentle, steady, as though waiting. Uka places the lantern at the center of the room and calls in an old monk, one who has studied dreams and death in equal measure. Together, they sit and they watch, and the lantern begins to whisper, not in words, not exactly, but in small shifts of flame, in curls of smoke that almost form symbols, in the rhythm of light and dark, as though it breathes. Uka closes his eyes, and in the silence, a voice begins to form, not his voice, not the monk's, but something older. It speaks of a woman, a lantern maker's daughter, lost in the great fire years before. She had died clutching one of her father's creations, a lantern he had made just for her, blue as the spring sky, with characters for return and safe painted inside the paper walls. Her father had searched for weeks, calling out, leaving lanterns at every bridge, every gate, every grave, and when he died, his tools were found wrapped in blue silk, the same shade as the lantern. The flame within, the monk now believes, is hers, not trapped, not angry, but waiting for a message to be heard, or perhaps just to be known. Uka does not order it destroyed, nor hidden. He places it in the care of a small temple by the river, where the priestesses leave out bowls of rice and salt, and the lantern is allowed to glow, unbothered, unquestioned. Some say it still appears on rare nights, when someone near is deeply lost, or deeply loved, but only briefly, like a sigh, or a forgotten name on the wind. And so, the mystery does not end. It softens, it settles, like the flame itself, small, warm, and forever flickering. By the time this final tale reaches us, Uka is older. The lines on his brow have deepened, not from anger, but from years spent thinking. He walks more slowly, pauses longer between sentences, but his eyes are just as clear. This story begins in spring, when the plum blossoms have just given way to the early burst of sakura. The trees outside the magistrate's court are in bloom, their branches heavy with pale pink petals that fall like snow, across roof tiles and the shoulders of passers-by. It is during this off-season that a curious case is brought before Uka, one that has no crime, no theft, no blood, only silence. A man named Yoshiwara has died. Not poor, not rich, a rice merchant with no children, no wife, no record of complaint. He simply passed away, seated on his veranda, with a cup of warm sake still in hand. And yet, the town is restless, because for all his solitude, Yoshiwara had one thing of note. A garden, not a grand one, not a nobleman's maze of gravel and ponds, but a modest courtyard filled with medicinal plants, carefully labeled in his handwriting, tended each morning at the same hour, his wooden sandals clicking softly across the stones. After his death, the plants wither, quickly, unnaturally, and the air in the alley behind his home grows odd, not foul, not fragrant, just expectant. Whispers begin that Yoshiwara was an herbalist, that he had once studied in Nagasaki under a Dutch physician, that he had, perhaps, used his garden not only to heal, but to summon. A neighbor reports seeing strange lights through the shutters. Another claims to have heard chanting, though she cannot recall the words. Soon, the matter is brought to Uka, not because anything unlawful has occurred, but because the villagers cannot sleep. Their dreams of coughing children who smile through fevers, of hands offering bowls of tea with eyes that do not blink. Uka visits the house, Alone. The gate creaks open under his hand. The stones of the path are mossy. The air smells faintly of chrysanthemum and something sharper, a medicinal tang that lingers in the nose. He walks the perimeter, listens. The house is quiet, but inside the garden wall, beneath the cherry blossoms just beginning to fall, he sees something unexpected. A cat, thin, old, missing an ear, but calm. It stares at him, then turns, and curls itself beneath a faded stone bench, where a single lantern sits, unlit. Oka kneels, not to touch, not to move, but simply to observe. He remains there for some time. When he stands, his decision is made. He does not order the property sold, nor burned, nor blessed. Instead, he leaves instructions. Let the house remain. Let it fall slowly into earth, as all things must. But place a small marker in the alleyway behind. Not a gravestone, but a message. 3 characters, carved in cedar. No debt unpaid. What debt? The townspeople wonder. No one knows. But after the sign is placed, the dreams cease. The air clears. The cat is seen now and then, but never within a garden wall. And as the cherry blossoms fall year after year, fewer and fewer recall the name Yoshiwara. Only the old lantern, now hanging from a nearby post, remembers. And perhaps so does Uka. He retires not long after, returns to a smaller home, one with no court, no chambers, just a small porch, and a view of the falling blossoms. The wind is quiet but biting. The year is 1701. Late winter. You are walking through Edo. The city is calm but cold. Snow clings to the tiled roofs and wooden eaves. It muffles footsteps, softens edges, and turns even the most familiar alleyways into silent corridors. Somewhere in the distance, a drum echoes. Faint, measured, the kind used not for war, but for ceremony. Today is not just cold. It is marked. At the heart of the city, in a courtyard outside a noble home, a group of men kneel. They are dressed plainly, in the muted grays and browns of travel-worn kimono. Their heads are shaved in the samurai style, their shoulders broad, but their posture still. There are 47 of them. Each carries a short blade, sheathed in plain lacquer. Each has come here willingly. They do not shout. They do not weep. Instead, they bow, low and steady, before a man who once disgraced their master. And they wait. This is the end of a very long beginning. But to understand it, to understand why their silence echoes louder than swords, we must go back, to a court, to an insult, to a man named Asano Naganori. He was a daimyo, a regional lord, young by some accounts, not foolish but proud. In 1701, he was called to serve in Edo Castle, assisting in ceremonies and receiving instruction from a senior court official, Kira Yashinaka. Kira was older, experienced, and, as many whispered, deeply political. He expected gifts, deference, the smooth flattery of noble etiquette. Asano did not give these, whether out of pride, naivety, or principle. He clashed with Kira. Words were exchanged. Then, one day, blades. Inside Edo Castle, where violence was strictly forbidden, Asano drew his sword. He wounded Kira, but did not kill him. It did not matter. Drawing a weapon within the castle was a grave crime. By sunset, Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. His lands were confiscated, his family disgraced, and his retainers, his samurai, were cast out, masterless. Ronin, 47 of them, now adrift, but not undone. They vanished, scattered across the provinces, They took up humble work, merchants, laborers, even beggars. Some pretended to become drunkards. Others married. They let the world forget them. But quietly, they planned. For nearly 2 years, they moved like shadows, never meeting openly, never writing of their intentions. They waited until Kira felt safe, until guards were relaxed, until winter came again. And then, on a snowy night in December, they struck. They climbed walls, cut through gates, bound servants, and found Kira hiding in a storehouse. They offered him a choice: to die with honor, like a Sano. He refused, and so they did it for him. Then they marched through the snow, through the sleeping streets. They carried Kira's severed head to Asano's grave, washed it, placed it beside incense, and bowed. Let's pause here, and in the next part, we'll watch how this act, so precise, so purposeful, did not fade quietly into history, but into something far more enduring. Legend. The year passes, then another still. Time, as always, begins to soften the edges of even the sharpest stories. But the tale of the Ronin, of their oath, their patience, their final strike, did not dissolve like so many other acts of blood and honor. It transformed. It grew, not into a report in dusty scrolls, but into something whispered, retold, shaped. Imagine yourself in a small tea house, tucked into a side street near a shrine. It's raining outside, not heavily, but gently, just enough to streak the paper screens with silver. Inside, a storyteller leans forward. He is old, or perhaps only seems so, his voice lined with years, his kimono faintly stained with ink and smoke. He tells you this, that the Ronin trained in secret temples, that their swords were folded 100 times over in silence, that before they struck, they walked in a line through a graveyard, each one leaving an offering to the spirits of their ancestors. He tells you that when they reached Kira's gate, they were met not by guards, but by fox spirits in the shape of men, sent to test their resolve. He says that the leader, Oishi, carried a single folded paper lantern, and that it glowed not with flame, but with the memory of their master's last breath. None of this, of course, is recorded, not in the legal documents, not in the court logs, not in the tidy retellings of officials, but it remains, because the Ronin became more than men. They became images. In kabuki theater, their story was turned into song and silk, with crimson face paint and slow, stylized movement. In woodblock prints, they were etched again and again, storming gates, kneeling in the snow, bowing before the grave, and in whispered prayers, offered in incense smoke and cold morning air. They became something even stranger, spirits of loyalty, guardians of the unspoken vow, silent sentinels for the unfulfilled promise. In some villages, it was said that if you stood at a crossroads at night, especially in winter, and bowed toward the east, you might see a shape in the mist, a kneeling figure, sword laid across his knees, eyes closed, waiting, not for war, not for peace, but for balance. The tale was not simple revenge. It was ritual. It was righting a cosmic wrong. And that is the thread that binds it to folklore. Because in the logic of folk tales, vengeance is not merely satisfaction. It is equilibrium. It is restoring the weight of what was taken. The Ronin, in this telling, are not killers. They are scales, and the snow that fell that night, some say it was not snow at all, but the ash of old oaths burning clean at last. After the Ronin completed their mission, The city did not erupt in joy. There were no fireworks, no festivals, no public accolades or celebration. Instead, there was silence. Heavy, careful silence. Because what they had done was both admired and deeply troubling. They had broken the law, but they had done it beautifully. And in the Japan of the early 18th century, still shaped by Confucian ideals, still ruled by layers of etiquette and inherited duty, that beauty was dangerous. The shogunate faced a dilemma. If they punished the Ronin, they risked angering the public, who had begun to admire the men as models of feudal virtue. But if they let them go, they would undermine their own authority. So they took their time. Weeks passed. The Ronin, now prisoners, sat in 4 separate temples, under the care of guards not quite sure whether they were jailers or hosts. And across the city, people whispered. They gathered at shrines, at tea stalls, in the back corners of bathhouses. They told the story again and again, and with each telling, it changed. Not in its facts, but in its rhythm. The tale became a pattern, a sequence, a ritual in itself. The samurai who drank in the same inns as Oishi had once done, now bowed more deeply. The swordsmiths of Edo began to craft new blades, one said to mirror those used in the assault, though no one could quite agree on the shape. Children recited the story like a chant. Old women folded paper figures, placing them at temple gates, each one dressed in tiny black robes. The Ronin, still alive, had already become part of the dead. When the final judgment came, it was not delivered with fanfare. It was quiet, official, ceremonial. They were granted the right to die by seppuku, ritual suicide, rather than be executed like criminals. And one by one, they took the blade. In death, they became legend. They were buried near their master, Asano, just as they had hoped. And even then, the story did not stop. For years, for decades, for centuries, pilgrims came to the graves, some to leave offerings, some to weep, some simply to watch the snow settle on the stone. It was said that if you knelt there with a clean heart and a question in your mind, you might hear the answer in the wind, or, more faintly still, in the echo of blades long since sheathed. The story of the 47 Ronin, like so many things in Japan, did not vanish when it ended. It lingered. It was retold, recast, relit from every angle. In the theater, it became a masterpiece. The tale was adapted into bunraku, puppet plays, and into the vivid, swaying drama of kabuki. Audiences wept as actors reenacted the solemn march to Kira's estate. They murmured with recognition at the sound of drums echoing the moment of vengeance. They watched Oishi kneel in reverence before the grave of Lord Asano again and again, year after year. And in every version, the Ronin were not just warriors. They were ideals. People called them Chushin-gishi, loyal and righteous samurai, not criminals, not murderers, but men who had fulfilled the highest calling of their station. Over time, shrines were built, graves were tended with care, woodblock prints circulated, showing the Ronin in various acts of silent resolve. Oishi sleeping on the street, Kira cowering behind a screen, the snowy procession with heads bowed in solemn pride. Even as modernity crept into Japan, as telegraph wires crossed the skies and steamships docked in the harbors, the Ronin endured. Their image was polished, refined, made into porcelain figures and lantern shades, into school plays and parlor tales. Their story became less about historical accuracy and more about spiritual balance. The idea that there could be harmony between duty and sorrow, between grief and strength, between the code of Bushido and the aching, trembling heart of being human. Even now, at Sengakuji Temple in Tokyo, where the Ronin lie buried beside their lord, you may see them. Not the men, of course, but the candles, still burning. The incense curling into air that carries both city noise and something older. Visitors leave coins, sake, origami cranes. They stand in silence, not as tourists, but as witnesses to something soft-spoken and enduring, a story that, in the end, was not just about revenge, but about devotion and the echo it leaves in the snow. Imagine yourself walking at twilight. The lanterns are being lit one by one, their paper skin glowing amber and gold. A low mist clings to the edges of the road, stirred only by the passing of sandals or the creak of a distant rickshaw. The air smells faintly of plum wine, of incense and pressed silk. The city is behind you now, its noise muffled and softened. Ahead lies a different place. You're approaching Yoshiwara, the walled district of pleasure, performance, and illusion in Edo-period Japan. Once built far from the city center as a containment, a boundary, over time it became a universe unto itself, a world of stylized beauty, strict routine, and hidden sorrow. It was often called the floating world, Ukiyo, a place to drift, to forget, to escape the burden of daily life. But beneath the painted faces, beneath the sound of shamizens and the rustle of silken robes, there were quieter stories, stories of waiting, of longing, and sometimes of ghosts. Yoshiwara was a world of rules. Its brothels were legal, regulated, and rigidly structured. The women inside were trained performers, masters of song, poetry, and the careful art of flirtation. The highest-ranking courtesans, called oirin, were like empresses behind the gate. They held power for a time, limited, shaped, and always watched. Their beauty was not just natural but curated. Elaborate hairpieces that took hours to shape, kimonos layered with seasonal motifs and coded colors. Even their walk was practiced, the slow, gliding steps of someone constantly on display. But for every oirin, there were dozens of lower-ranked women, apprentices, servants, girls sold to the district as children, their contracts stretching over years, sometimes decades. Some found fortune, most did not. And when death came, whether from illness, despair, or accident, it was rarely loud. It was folded into the silence of the place. Folded, but not always forgotten. There were whispers, of course, of voices in the corridors late at night, of figures glimpsed in the polished surface of a makeup mirror, of kimono sleeves brushing past when no one was there. The people of Yoshiwara, many of whom had no family beyond the gate, created their own rituals to keep the dead close and to ease their passing. It was said that if a courtesan died with her heart unfulfilled, still waiting for a lover who never came, she might linger, not with vengeance, like some Onryo, but with sorrow, with longing. These ghosts were often described as beautiful and silent, just as they were in life. They appeared in dreams, in camelot reflections, in the way the wind caught a paper screen and made it shift ever so slightly. Not all feared them. Some felt comfort, as if the floating world remembered its own. There is a story, one among many, that drifts through the corridors of Yoshiwara like incense long after the flame has gone out. They say she was once called Koana, Little Flower, Not her real name, of course. Real names rarely mattered in the floating world. Names changed with seasons, with rank, with the preferences of wealthy patrons. But Koena is what they remembered. A girl of soft laughter, of poems scribbled in margins, of a voice like wind through reeds. She arrived young, as many did, sold to the district before she understood what the world could ask of her. She worked as an attendant at first, sweeping floors, brushing hair, preparing the bathhouse fires. Later, she trained, learned how to read a man's desire from the way he adjusted his sleeve, or how quickly he finished his tea. She learned how to smile when her heart did not wish to, and how to speak in riddles that meant both everything and nothing at all. She rose in rank, not to Warren, not quite, but high enough that her name was known in certain tea houses, her walk recognized, her preferences whispered. She had admirers, patrons, and one, they say, who promised her freedom. A samurai, or perhaps a merchant's son. The story changes depending on who tells it, but the ending they agree upon. He never returned. Maybe his ship sank. Maybe his family intervened. Maybe he was never honest to begin with. Koena waited. For weeks, then months. She still served others, still sang her songs, but her eyes no longer lit with a lantern glow. One morning, she was gone. Some say she left the district under a borrowed name. Some say she faded from illness, a quiet death marked only by the smell of plum wine and damp silk. Others say she walked into the garden behind the okiya, beneath the tall willow, and was never seen again. But the willow remained, and so did something else. In the years that followed, strange things were whispered about that tree. Attendants reported finding kimono sashes tied to the branches in the morning, knotted intricately, in a style no one claimed to know. Visitors walking past late at night said they felt watched, not threatened, just seen. The wind in that part of the garden sounded different. Sad perhaps, or remembering. And now and then, once every few years, perhaps, someone would return from a dream and say they had spoken to her. A woman beneath the willow, in robes pale as mist, who asked only one question. Have you seen him? And then she would smile and vanish. The women of Yoshiwara never feared the willow ghost. They left offerings beneath the tree. A comb, a poem, a ribbon of green silk. They whisper her name, Koena, like a prayer for gentleness. Because in a world built on illusions, she had become something true, not legend, not curse, but memory, a quiet persistence in a place where most names were forgotten. A reminder that even in the most gilded cages, longing does not disappear. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it blooms again. If you follow the narrow back lanes of Yoshiwara, past the brocade shops and tea houses, past the red lanterns swaying like sleepy eyes in the dusk, you might find it, an old house, set slightly askew from its neighbors, its paint faded, its sign cracked. Few remember its name. Fewer still recall who once played there. But some call it the shamisen house, not for what it sold, but for what it sounded like. Once, they say, the music drifted from it day and night. Not loud, not lively, but haunting. Low notes, drawn from the 3 strings of the shamisen, carried through the thin, sliding doors, spilling out into the street like threads of memory. It was not a pleasure house exactly, not an okiya or a brothel, more of a gathering space, a quiet corner where retired courtesans came to rest, to teach, to drink plum tea and retell old stories, and to play. The shamisen was more than an instrument. It was a vessel for loss, for defiance, for beauty no longer bound to men's approval. Here, songs were composed and forgotten in the same breath. Melodies based on dreams, on weather, on the scent of the rain. They were not written down, only remembered. And when the last woman passed, a former Oiran with silver in her braid and a laugh like wind chimes, the house closed, and the songs faded, but not entirely, because strange things happen at the Shamisen house. Caretakers report hearing music in the early morning, notes plucked with elegance and restraint. No one is ever there. Some say the house keeps its own memories, that the wood holds echoes, that the strings, though unplayed, still hum when the moon is right. On misty nights, a few have glimpsed silhouettes through the rice paper walls. Not frightening, just present. A group of women seated in a half circle, heads tilted in concentration, fingers moving across invisible strings. And always, always, the faintest sound of a song no one remembers how to play. They say if you hear it, you must never try to write it down, that the melody belongs to the air, not the page. To try and claim it would be to forget it. The women of the district say the Shamisen house is not haunted. It is respected. It is a place where the past hums softly to itself. A lullaby for those who lived too long in someone else's dream. And in that song, there is no sorrow, only release. Shall we move now to the final tale? In the waning days of the Edo period, when the walls of old traditions had begun to buckle, and steamships had started to appear like strange phantoms in the harbor, Yoshiwara still burned with its slow and dreamlike glow. Not as bright as before, not as loud, but still beautiful, still tragic. It is said that in those final years, there was one Oiran who refused to leave. Her name has been forgotten, or perhaps deliberately erased. Some call her simply the last Oiran. Unlike others who quietly retired or were married off, she stayed. Her hair still lacquered into elaborate loops, her robes still layered in defiant color, her gita still tall enough to slow each step in the ceremony. She walked the midnight streets alone, not to entertain, but to remember. They say she never spoke, that her lips were always painted but sealed, that her eyes watched with the weight of centuries, as if carrying every gaze ever cast upon her, even after the district began to change. As new styles, new customers, new laws began to seep in like damp through old wood, she remained, unmoved, unmodernized, unmarried. The story says that she died in silence. No attendants, no procession, just a candle burned down to nothing in the corner of her room, and a faint scent of camellia left behind. But Yoshiwara did not forget her, because sometimes, in the hours between night and dawn, the narrow alleys of the district still echo with the click of high wooden heels, a flash of brocade silk, where no one stands, a comb fallen beside a doorway, warm to the touch, a flicker of candlelight through an upper window, where all the lamps have long since gone dark. Some say she appears to lost girls, those unsure of where they belong. She does not speak, but she listens. She does not guide, but she watches. And in that watching, there is something almost kind, a patience beyond time, the gaze of someone who has known beauty as a weapon and survived its cost. Others believe she guards the district itself, a spirit not of vengeance or sorrow, but of memory, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed illusions leave behind real shadows. They say if you ever see her, truly see her, you must bow, not out of fear, but respect, for she is the last of her kind, a final echo, a whisper wrapped in silk and smoke. And as she vanishes into the lamplight, so too does the floating world. Its lovers, its liars, its poems, its perfume, and its ghosts. Now, if your eyes are still open, if your breath still follows the rhythm of the story, you may be ready to drift gently toward the end. Shall we close the curtain now and return together to the present? Let us move. And so, we return from narrow bathhouse corridors still fragrant with pine and steam, from quiet courtyards where judges once weighed truth against illusion, from snow-covered courtyards marked by silent vows, and from streets lit by trembling lanterns in the floating world. We drift gently back from the candle-lit echoes of Edo. The stories we've wandered through tonight, they're not grand epics, not tales of warlords or emperors, but quieter things, whispers, steps behind shoji screens, pages turned in a half-lit room, each story a thread, delicate, fraying, but still holding fast. Through centuries of change, in the bathhouses, we saw how steam could blur the line between living and dead. Among the streets of justice, we met a man who balanced law and folklore in equal measure. In snowy courtyards, we watched myth sharpen grief into legend. And in the pleasure district, we heard how beauty can haunt just as deeply as sorrow. These were not just tales of the past, but of people, real or remembered, trying to make sense of their world. Through ritual, through story, through silence. And now, as the night deepens and the steam fades, perhaps you feel a little more still, a little more at ease, the rhythm of your breath. Calm, the space around you, quiet, in a world that so often rushes toward clarity and light. There's comfort in letting things remain a little fogged, a little mysterious, just like the bathhouse at night, just like a forgotten alley in Yoshiwara, just like the voice of a ghost that only speaks in dreams. Thank you for listening to Boring Folklore for Sleep. May the night be kind to you. May your sleep be deep, and may your dreams wander gently through the lantern-lit streets of old Japan. Good night, and remember, sometimes the past doesn't rest. It only waits for someone willing to listen, even in sleep.